Hi everyone, it's Darlene. Welcome to my fourth card in the series One Die Four Ways. Today I'm using the die to make a shaker card. So you can see I have all these micro beads inside the little square compartments. So here is the die one last time, Wandering Vine Squares, and here are the beads that I'm using. They're from Simon Says Stamp, and there are so many beads in here, I'm not sure I'm ever going to need beads again. I'm going to start by taking a piece of A2 Neenah Solar White cardstock and a piece of foam. This is 3mm foam, so it's pretty thick. And I've cut it to be 4 by 5 1/4, so a 1/8 of an inch mat all the way around. And then I'm going to place my die toward the left because I'm going to add a sentiment to the right. So I'm just sort of centering it up and down and leaving enough space to have enough foam on that left side. And then I'll put some surgical tape on it to hold it in place, and I'll run my foam through the Big Shot. The outside is really easy to get out, the negative part of this die, so I'm just going to pull it out. And you can see how this is such a great die for a shaker because the foam is actually outside the outline, so you will not see it once you put that acetate on it. So you can see how it fits right there in the center of my card and covers the whole thing. So now I'm going to adhere this to my card base using some Tombow Mono Multi-Glue. I'm going to make sure that I get glue all over the big areas, and then I'm going to put it as close as I can to the box, but I don't want it seeping into the box because this glue is tacky after it's dried, and that could cause me some problems later. And I kind of wish later on that I had used some multimedia matte for this, but anyway, this is what I use because it's a nice strong glue, and I did dot a little bit on those thin lines because you definitely want those sticking down to your base so they don't lift up and let the beads go into the different compartments. All right, so I'm carefully placing this onto my card base. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put an acrylic block on here and just let it rest for a minute or two just to make sure that it's dry and sticking really well. Now you'll notice that I have these openings in between the boxes from the die that I pulled out, the cut that I pulled out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a wall with my multi-matte medium because this glue is kind of stiff and it will allow me to kind of layer it up to a thick kind of high wall in between these two in between the two pieces of all these holes. So you can see that it works great, and the beads are not gonna stick to it because it doesn't dry tacky. And so you can really see it on this long one here that I'm just kind of squeezing it out as I move along, and it kind of works like doing the icing trim on a cake. It just sort of comes out and it keeps its form really well. So I fill in all of these holes here, and then again I'm going to let this dry until it's completely hard. Next, I'm going to fill the compartments with the beads. I'm just going to pull out a rainbow of colors, and each one of these has a ton of beads in it. It's really amazing how much is in here. So I'm just going to put a different one in each one of these squares. I'm just going to tap it in, and they stayed pretty well contained, but while I was doing the yellow ones, one of the yellow beads got into the orange container, and they're so tiny, so I found out that I could take my pick-me-up stick and just touch that yellow bead and then put it into the correct compartment. So it's a nice handy tool to have in case you spill in the wrong compartment. Okay, so after I've filled all my compartments, now I'm going to take my glue again and I'm going to put it all the way around, and I'm going to be careful to get really close to the edge because my acetate is going to go on top of this, and I want to make sure that my beads are all contained in their respective compartments. And notice that I'm only going around the die cut area because my acetate is just as wide as that die cut area. So make sure it's centered on there and carefully press it down, and then I'm just kind of tap it a little bit with my fingers. And then I decided again to grab my acrylic block and place it on top to make sure that I get even pressure all over the whole card. While that's drying, I'm going to take some black cardstock, and some of you had suggested using wax paper, so I put some wax paper in between, ran it through the Big Shot, and as I pulled it out, it was pretty easy to get out, but I still had to take my paper piercer, poke all the holes, so it's not like it fell right out of the die, and I still had to wedge my paper piercer in there a little bit to get it out, but it definitely improved getting this die out. So it was definitely a lot easier with the wax paper, so I would recommend using that. Now it's time for the top layer of my shaker card, and I've cut a piece of Neenah cardstock just wider and longer than my A2 size. And you can see I'm sort of lining it up left to right to make sure I've positioned it about where it needs to go, and then I'll just center it up and down. And the reason why I cut my cardstock larger is because I just was scared I wasn't going to be able to cut it exactly where the die cut was in the foam. So I decided to cut it larger and trim it back afterwards. So once I get the die out, I can lay this on top and see how if I've cut it correctly, and it's definitely exactly where it needs to be, and I'm just going to cut off the edges once I glue it on. All right, so I flipped it over, and I'm also flipping my black die cut over and placing it inside the negative that I just cut. And I'm going to adhere this with some surgical tape. And the reason I'm doing this is not to secure it in place, but just to hold it and position it so that when it's time to glue it down, it's pretty much in the right spot, and I don't have to do a bunch of maneuvering to get it inlaid while it's wet, because I know my glue is going to dry pretty quickly. So I'm just kind of putting some surgical tape on some key areas, and you can see, I'm going to slow it down here, that it's just barely touching that black area. So it's half on, half off. I'm just putting it in some major areas so that the die won't fall out when I pick it up. So to adhere this, I'm going to put my Tombow glue directly onto the acetate and that exposed foam. I'm not going to get close to the openings though, because this is all acetate, so I'm not too worried about getting too close. I'm going to have some two-way glue on the back of my die cut. So I flipped it over, and you can see that I'm just tapping all over the black die cut out. I'm moving pretty quickly, but there's a lot of glue coming out, so it's not going to dry completely by the time I'm finished. So once I get my black cardstock covered with the two-way glue, now I can place this right over the acetate. And again, because that foam is outside the black area, you're not going to see it, and that's why I love this die cut for a shaker. So again, put the acrylic block on there to make sure, and there's pressure all over the card and it's all even. And then I'll take that off and everything looks good. So all I need to do is take my scissors, and I'm just going to trim on all four sides. I'll speed this up here, and I'm just using the card itself as a guide. And that completes the shaker portion. So I'm going to take a ruler and a 0.3 Copic liner, and I'm going to draw lines on 3 sides of the card. And the reason I'm only doing 3 is because I'm going to add a piece of black cardstock to the right. I'm not sure exactly how much I'm going to add, so I'm just going to sort of eyeball it. I want to have it sort of the die so that it's even inside the white area. So I'm just going to position it to leave enough space for one more of those black lines with my Copic liner. I'll cut that and put some tape runner on it and adhere it to the right edge. And then I'll grab that Copic liner and draw one last line right against that black strip of cardstock. My sentiment is from this new set by Simon Says Stamp called Friends of Life. And so I'm going to use my MISTI to position it, and I realized that the foam inside the shaker was making it too high, and it was about the same width as the foam that comes with the MISTI. So I took the foam out, I inked it up with some Hero Arts black ink, and I stamped it down. And then there are several sub-sentiments that you can put in there, and so I grabbed one of those and put it on the inside. It says, "Are what fill life's garden." And that's it for my shaker card. Now, I seriously think this was a really easy shaker card to make with this die cut, so I hope you'll try it, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.